So hello, everybody. Bryan Adler, elder care law attorney with Rothkoff Law Group. I'm joined today here by Liz Broadbent from Auckland, New Zealand, and I'll let Liz introduce herself.
I'm a professor of health psychology at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and I've been doing research into robotics and healthcare for about 15 years.
So I'm fascinated by, as you and I have spoken previously, I'm fascinated by technology as it relates to elder care, because no matter how good the care can become, whether it's hands-on or the quality of the facilities, ultimately those costs just increase and increase. And technology, I feel, and I think Liz, you would agree with me, is what can ultimately bring the cost down and make care more accessible, possibly better, hopefully better. So I was researching robotics and technology and innovations in the elder care sphere, and I came across Liz at the University of Auckland, and her background is really fascinating. So Liz, can you touch a little bit on what your background is and what your role is on the team?
Yeah, so the thing that got me most interested in robotics was reading science fiction books when I was growing up. And in these books, the robots were always helping people and sort of keeping an eye on them and guiding them in the right direction. So I decided to study electrical engineering at the University of Canterbury and got my engineering degree. And at that stage, we couldn't really make robots that were caring for people. So I went back and studied psychology and decided I'd try and build a robot myself that sort of had a human-like mind and could help people. And so I did my PhD in psychology, and now I work at the intersection of psychology and robotics.
And you mentioned when we spoke a couple weeks ago, you work with a team out of South Korea, right?
Yeah, so I work in a team at the University of Auckland. This team consists of engineers, computer scientists, and healthcare academics. And as well, we partner with South Korea for a number of projects in elderly care and robotics.
And what are some of those projects looking like today? What's the short term, and then what's your 50-year goal?
So we've recently completed a couple of studies together with the Korean University, Ifa Women's University, and they sent over a couple of robots. One was a daily care robot. So we programmed the robot to be able to remind people to do daily tasks, like remind them to take their medication, remind them when they've got a doctor's appointment coming up or they've got a haircut coming up, remind them to lock the doors, alert them to any safety concerns around the house, like windows being left open, and also provide cognitive stimulation. So these were games that people could play on the robot. And there was one, for example, where you had these little magnetic blocks that you moved around and little pictures appeared on top of the blocks. And you had to remember which order they were in and then put them back in the same order after a certain period of time.
And the users, they became kind of attached to the robots, right?
They do. It's often something that, the robots that we build are not designed for companionship, but it's something that develops naturally because we are social beings. We like to see human-like qualities in robots, and we form an attachment to them. So when the robot, even if it's got lights or plays music or just says things to you from time to time during the day, you do form an attachment to the robot.
And that's something that when we talk about the future of elder care, and that I told you about this, we do a lot of community education, a lot of professional education, and some of the topics involve technology, and a natural rebuttal to the true robotic caregivers, a humanoid type robot that's actually providing care is, well, that removes the whole social component, or removes the human touch. It removes that connection. What are your thoughts on that with your psychology background and your technological background?
Well, so far we've actually seen the opposite of that. when we've put robots in elder care facilities or in people's own homes, what we found is that it's actually increased social interaction with nurses or caregivers or fellow residents. And this is partly because there's now something to talk about, so that they'll say, oh, wow, you've got a robot, and they'll talk about the robot. Whereas before, a caregiver might come in and just give someone a cup of tea, or coffee in the States, whereas now
we drink tea here too. We drink tea.
Now they say, oh, wow, you've got this fluffy robot. It reminds me of my cat. Do you have cats? So it starts a conversation that they might not have had otherwise.
Liz, the question that I asked you is, what is a psychologist doing on a robotics team? And I think you phrased this. I don't want to put words in your mouth or misphrase, but one of your roles is to give humanity to the technology.
Yeah, you could say that. I guess engineers typically, they'll build some piece of technology, but they might not necessarily ask people first what they want. And they might not think about all of the social components and the way people socially interact. Yeah. And so part of my role is sort of this co-design process with older people, so that we go to them and say, well, what kind of thing do you want? And then we get feedback. We make the robot, we bring the robot back, and we get feedback as to, okay, yes, that's what I want, or no, that's not what I want. And then we, as also a technique that we do, is we try to build in some kind of social componentry into the robots, so that the way they interact with people is more natural and is, polite and obeys social norms that we've got. And increasingly, we're looking at ways that we can make robots more acceptable, and I guess that they form an engagement with patients. And so that when the robot might say, okay, it's time to take your medication, then the person trusts the robot and also is more willing to do what the robot says.
Now, Liz, when you say that, and I think one concept that we've missed here, when we're talking about robots, describe the structure of this, because my guess is some people are going to envision arms, legs, a head. What are you working on right now? What does it actually look like?
The robot that we're using at the moment has got wheels, so it doesn't have legs. And this is partly because it makes it easier to move around. Walking is actually extremely difficult for a robot. So
I was just saying, what was that Japanese robot? Was it called Asimov? What was that Japanese robot that managed to make walk?
Asimo is made by Honda.
Okay.
And that robot, it was in a movie called Robot and Frank, but they made the robot have more abilities than it actually had in the movie compared to in real life. So that robot does walk around. It's got arms, it's got legs, it's got a head and a torso. And some robots have that, but most of the ones in elderly care do not, because it costs more if you want to have a robot to have legs and walk around. So it's much cheaper to make it have wheels.
Which ultimately is a good thing, because the goal of the technology is to drop down costs.
Exactly. So the idea is that we can make robots that are affordable, so that people can actually buy them and use them.
So right now, if I have a loved one suffering from dementia or some other cognitive incapacity, what is realistically available to them, both functionally, meaning that can actually take care of them, but also make them feel more soothed, make them feel less agitated and less concerned?
So the most widely available robot commercially is called Paro, and Paro is a companion robot. It's made to look like a seal, a baby seal, and it functions it's got a heater inside, so it's body temperature. You can stroke it and pat it. It moves its flippers, moves its tail. It makes little seal noises. So it's like a pet that will sit on your lap and you can stroke it, and it's been shown to calm people down, to reduce loneliness, reduce blood pressure, reduce agitation, reduce depression. And so that is the most commercially available and effective healthcare robot.
What does one Paro cost if you ordered one, approximately?
It's approximately $5,000. So for an individual, it's quite expensive, but for a retirement facility, it's affordable.
But there has to be some, even at $5,000, there has to be some sort of return on that investment at some point, because you're reducing the need for potentially medication, staff intervention to calm people down, hospitalizations from increased agitation, behavioral health stays, and things like that. Correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So now let's go to the 50 years from now. Or you'll tell me, how far are we from having a humanoid style robot that can do things like help with bathing, dressing, toileting, really replace a human caregiver, or at least supplement a human caregiver?
I think we're a long way away from that. In terms of research facilities, there are robots being made that can assist with bathing, assist with eating, assist with feeding, making beds, heating up meals, things like that. But at the moment, they're not commercially available, and they don't all look human-like. So, making something look human-like is very expensive. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it looks very mechanical. It's just like an arm or something like that.
That not only does that sound mechanical, that just sounds creepy, having this arm just like dancing around your apartment, making a meal for you.
Yeah, but actually, when you talk to people, if you've got a disability, then you are grateful for whatever assistance that can be provided for you. And people are also, they want to be independent, and they do not want to be reliant on other people coming around and helping them. So if they've got a robotic arm that can help them live independently for longer in their own home, mm-hmm. and they don't have to bother somebody else to help them, then they're extremely happy with that.
So with the technological innovations, you are optimistic that it won't create increased social isolation. If anything, you're seeing the opposite of that, correct?
That's right, yeah. Often robots are made with the ability to do things like Skype calls and connect over the internet with other people. So we see that they actually do increase social connection rather than reduce it.
And what do you think about Alexa?
Alexa, I like Alexa. We've got Alexa at home, and we used to live in the States for a little while. We lived in Boston, and having Alexa over there was really great. In New Zealand, it's slightly less useful, I think, because it's not really geared up to the New Zealand market, I guess you could say. But yeah, we enjoyed listening to the radio, having a little chat function, a timer function, all that stuff. And people are starting to test Alexa with older people as well, and try and add on functions. And from what I've read so far, older people do appreciate Alexa.
Great. So all in, after this discussion, are you overall optimistic that long-term care globally is going to get significantly better over the next few decades, or worse, or about the same?
Oh, I'm optimistic that care is going to get better. I do think that technology, it informs individuals, it can help monitor your health, it can provide education, it can provide assistance, links to your doctor, links to family members, it can provide alerts. For example, they've got kettles that, they will provide an alert to a caregiver if it's not used, for example, and things like, so that you can have a pattern of behavior observed by these sensing technologies. And if that behavior does not occur, then that means that perhaps the person hasn't been able to get out of bed that morning, and send an alert. So things like that, I think they're really going to help people reduce things like when someone falls over and lies on the ground for a long time. It's going to help people get assistance more quickly.
That's great. That's great. Liz, I really appreciate you taking the time from and I mean, a whole discussion on technology. you and I were able to connect now twice. It's 8 a.m. where you are. It's 5 p.m. where I am. And we were able to connect like this and have a conversation. And I just want to thank you again. I sent you an email on a whim. I found your research. I found you on the University of Auckland website. I'm so grateful you took the time to speak with me.
Oh, it was lovely speaking with you too. And yeah, as you say, this illustrates the ability of technology to improve social connections.
So again, I'm Bryan Adler. I'm an elder care law attorney with Rothkoff Law Group in the Philadelphia area. And we have Liz Broadbent here with the University of Auckland. I just want to thank you again and hope you enjoy your day.
Thank you.